Welcome to part 6 of this 8-series presentation, in which the topic of education will be the theme. The organisation representing this issue at ZDAY London 2013 was Change the Future, an online web platform looking to allow an open access discourse and discussion to help to implement positive changes to the education system and society from the bottom up rather than the top down. Open source access and non-coercive participation forms an integral part of the social model the movement advocates. To find out more about Change the Future, please click on the link in the description below to find out more about the work they are doing to bring about a positive change to the future of education by watching their presentation at ZDAY. Before delving into the subject matter of this presentation, I would like to preface it with a little perspective regarding what the Zeitgeist Movement actually advocates. The movement is a sustainability advocacy group who recognise that the plethora of social and environmental problems facing humanity today are not the result of some rogue flaw in human nature, poor political leadership or fiscal policy, but rather a direct result and symptom of the root premise and function of our current socio-economic system itself. Therefore, to address these issues in the most efficient and effective way possible, the movement advocates the implementation of what could be deemed a natural law resource-based economic model, or NLRBE for short. The definition of this model is the humane application of the scientific method for social concern. Were our current capability and scientific understandings not withheld by the monetary market system's gravitation towards self-maximization, self-preservation, and the requirement for the need of scarcity and inefficiency, we could liberally apply this technological capability in line with current understandings of natural law via the scientific method to provide an access abundance for all the world's people, technically, overcoming the need for the competitive scarcity-based free market monetary market system and the outdated mode of social problem-solving methods inherent to it being politics. If this is the first time you've heard anything about TZM, then that will most likely sound a bit wacky. If you're not aware of our current technological capability to solve social and environmental problems, that is. It may also sound like pie-in-the-sky fantasy talk without a proper appreciation of the factors that shape human behaviour, the underlying dynamics of money creation, and its relationship to growing environmental destruction and income inequality, as well as the exponential trend in technological capability which is and which will continue to become an ever-increasing threat to the labour for income game. If by now at least some of these issues mentioned are unknown to you, then even if you are shaking your head in disagreement or disbelief regarding some of the claims made so far, how do you know you are right in your opinion? What are you basing it on? Indeed, what do any of us base our beliefs or opinions on? I'm bringing up these points to hopefully help put the title of the joint event held between the movement and Change the Future into some sort of context. That being, what's the point of school? A question that seems to seldom be asked in most mainstream discussions on the subject, with most tending to merely focus on standardized test results and grades without tending to the purpose of school and education in general. However, if we are to view these issues in the correct manner, that is as something not divorced from other social functions, but an integral part of them, it seems this question must be addressed first and foremost. Therefore, the title of this talk is the education issue, and an issue it most certainly is. As the critics of the current educational system are plentiful, providing many an astute observation and criticism of the education system, as well as evidence regarding what educational approaches actually work with regards to instilling a lifelong intrinsic love of learning in a child. I have given 3 lectures on this topic myself and set up a website outlining the issues we face in education, some of the potentially interesting models looking to address these issues, as well as providing a vehicle for movement members to go into schools to deliver our materials to the younger generations. I will skirt over some of the materials mentioned in these talks in this presentation, so if you've not had a chance, please do check them and the many other collected materials and studies on the subject of education out at the TZM Education website. Whilst the observations by many of these educational critics may well be sound, their analysis and solutions are usually framed within the context of an underlying acceptance or agreement with our current socio-economic system in general. This misses a crucial, paralysing underpinning towards the sensible changes many of these dissenting voices advocate, and that is that many of the changes they seek are simply not supported by the core mechanisms of our system, or more succinctly put, education reflects culture, and culture reflects education. More on this a little later, but firstly, why is the topic of school of such an interest to me in particular? Well, perhaps in part it's because I'm now a teacher who did not do very well at school. At least in the manner in which it currently operates, that is. I did not adjust well to the impersonal, coercive, factory-style approach of secondary school especially. I realise this is not every child's impression of school, but you would have to live in cloud cuckoo land to think that most kids jump out of bed every morning eager to get to the place. A good question would be, if no one forced kids to go to school, would they still go? I'm pretty sure that many might say they would. But after a night of playing the Xbox online with their mates till midnight, my money is on the duvet at 7 AM. Well, obviously you might say, but that's just the way it is. We all have to do things we don't want to do, and if they want a decent job, then they need to go to school and work their backside off. Or in this man's case, inside one. And you thought you had a shitty job. But are these assumptions valid? And is this the sort of society we want to teach our kids makes sense by educating them to participate in it? One in which you must earn your right to life, even when we have the technological capability to render most jobs obsolete and provide an access abundance for the entire human population sustainably? Part 1. What's the point of school? Upon an internet search, I found various responses to this question, ranging from it helping to prepare you for later life, learning how to learn, to socialization skills and getting a decent job. But let's go straight to the horse's mouth and see what the Department of Education has to say on the matter, shall we? Their mission statement reads as follows. Our vision is for a highly educated society in which opportunity is more equal for children and young people, no matter what their background or family circumstances. Okay, let's define our terms then, shall we? According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the definition of education is the process of receiving or giving systematic instruction. So translated, this reads, to have a society in which only children and young people of all backgrounds are given an equal opportunity to learn how to become capable of giving and receiving systematic instruction. Well, that's me sold. How inspiring! It seems like it favours children over adults, assuming that learning is in fact not a lifelong process, and sounds suspiciously like it has something to do with the improvement in the arbitrary giving or receiving of orders, rather than the ability to question illegitimate authority. I admit that I am being ever so slightly facetious, playing with semantics with this interpretation, and perhaps I do come across as just a little cynical. But being a cynic does not necessarily mean you're wrong. In fact, I assert that this general disposition is rather closer to the truth than perhaps even the Department of Education realise or choose to admit. There is most certainly one thing in their definition that's spectacularly wrong, and that is that equal opportunity does, or indeed could ever exist for all inside the current system, a fallacy we will return to a little later. But first of all, the words health and happiness were nowhere to be found in this or any other definition I could find regarding the purpose of education, official or otherwise, online when preparing this presentation. Well, that's not quite true, actually. A popular quote falsely attributed to John Lennon doing the rounds on social media sites goes something like this. When I was 5 years old, my mother always told me that happiness was the key to life. When I went to school, the teacher asked what I wanted to be when I grow up. I wrote down, happy. They told me I did not understand the assignment. I told them they did not understand life. Falsely attributed though this quote is, which perhaps underscores the lack of sceptical thinking in the general population, there is perhaps something in it that resonates with us all, which is why it is so popular and why there are so many critics of the current educational system. We all have a need to feel autonomous in what we do, to seek our own happiness rather than have others dictate it for us. So whilst we could wrangle over the definition, wording and method of the aim of education, I would say that making the primary goal of it, and in fact that of society, to be the pursuit of health and happiness and human well-being, to be a pretty good overall starting point, and certainly a better one than the Department of Education's definition. I'm sure many teachers and schools claim that they are attempting to do just this. But having looked into the history behind the current coercive education system and the resulting attitude of many of the teaching staff labouring under it, I am afraid that I'm not convinced. And in fact, an awful lot of teachers themselves do not seem all that happy either, and I don't blame them. Many brilliant teachers toil away in a system which you seldom find any of them actually agree with. They are bound in a never-ending spiral of red tape and bureaucracy to an educational paradigm so obsessed with grades and test scores that in some schools this is even managed and monitored in a real-time computerized system on site. This is to be expected considering the intended initial design of the system. The current educational model was devised in the age of the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, where the need for rote learning, increased production and obedience to authority was paramount. Please see my lecture entitled The History of Coercive Education from ZDAY 2012 for more information on this subject. In this Prussian model of education, memorization of facts, fixed habits of response to authority, segregation into peer groups, scheduled breaks, the ringing of bells and alike were all characteristics of early behavioural techniques, all of which was intentionally modelled by the Prussian Empire, who sought a more obedient population after their troops' failure to follow orders in battle. So successful it was that many governments around the world soon started to adopt this model. This early form of operant conditioning techniques was later refined by Frederick Taylor and B.F. Skinner and is still used in marketing and advertising strategy today because it works. Well, in the short term at least. The problem is that reinforcement must continually be applied in order to ensure obedience, something that apparently not everyone appreciates blighting their everyday landscape, as it no longer does in the city of Sao Paulo in Brazil. In 2007, the Clean City Law came into effect, and ever since there's been no advertising allowed in the city, much to the dismay of industry, but according to a recent survey, not to the 70% of residents who say they are pleased with the new look Sao Paulo. This pleasurable outcome of feeling like you are not in an environment constantly wanting something from you comes as no surprise to me at least. And nor should the apathy and boredom of those forced to endure the relentless coercion of the current education system either. Why pile stress on our kids via pressure to excel in grades and tests, cramming information that is most probably of no interest to them and will soon be forgotten anyway, when it can easily be accessed online at the time it's needed, as long as you have the critical thinking skills to ascertain what is true or not at least, a subject not taught in school. I regularly encounter teachers who complain about being back at work, how much of a pain certain kids are, that some children are just stupid, and how they long for the end of each week and the end of term. Given this attitude of many teachers, should we really be all that surprised when the kids say the exact same thing about them and school? It's as though it's assumed that learning is supposed to be boring, tedious and torturous, instead of an integral part of the natural inquisitive that comes along with being human. But perhaps it is. Perhaps there's a good reason for such methods. After all, most people do indeed hate their job, right? As one teacher I met recently explained, this is precisely what school is all about. Teaching kids to stick to something regardless of whether they like it or not. After all, they better get used to it. That's what's coming their way anyway. So maybe I was wrong all along, and there's a good reason for the carrot and stick approach after all. Maybe we should be teaching our kids to get used to doing things they don't want to do and condition them to uphold the pillars of civilized society by getting a job, paying their taxes and exercising their right to vote in a democratic, free society. But in all this, we forgot to ask one group of people in particular their thoughts on the matter: the kids. After all, they are the custodians of the future, so perhaps it might be nice to ask them what sort of future they would like. But this is giving them way too much credit and control, isn't it? I mean, come on, he's probably going to eat that. Kids don't know what's good for them. Adults do. Don't they? Part 2. Cultural Assumptions. Can we as supposedly responsible adults actually justify to our kids that we are educating them to take part in a social system that is inherently designed to maximize human health, happiness and well-being? Our education system, just like all of our other cultural institutions and values, do not exist inside a vacuum. As mentioned earlier, they must reflect the culture in which they exist in order to remain relevant. So let's take an inventory of how our current culture is doing in the promotion of health, happiness and well-being, shall we? As we do, it's worth appreciating the fact that in developed countries, child happiness, educational scores, teenage pregnancy, drug addiction, mental illness and a whole host of other social conditions, including the all-important social mobility mentioned earlier in the mission statement from the Department of Education, are significantly worse for everyone, rich or poor, in more financially unequal countries. So it stands to reason that if we are to make health, happiness and human well-being the focal point of education, then the promotion of a system designed to bring about more financial equality must be at the heart of society if we are to provide equal opportunity for all. So surely we adults have got a pretty good rein in on the problem. Unfortunately, we don't. These are the adult world results regarding financial inequality. 1% of humanity now owns 46% of the world's wealth, an increase from the previous 40% figure touted in recent years. Roughly 80% live on less than $10 a day, 50% on less than $3, and a sixth of this planet's human population are starving to death on less than $1.25 a day. And what about the environment that supports us all? How are we doing on that front? Everyone clearly knows that this is a problem to be addressed, or else there would not be so many sustainable and environmental initiatives in schools or recycling bins outside our homes every week. So given this recognition, surely we, the adult world, is at least making progress in this area of well-being, right? Well, no. I'm afraid we are failing miserably here as well. Because we will need 2 Earths by 2030 to keep on our current rates of consumption. The last remaining rainforest could be consumed in less than 40 years. Species are going extinct at roughly 1,000 times their normal rate due to human activity, affecting biodiversity. Over 70% of the world's fish species are disappearing at an alarming rate due to overfishing. And 99% of the materials used in the process of manufacturing for the goods that ends up on sale ends up as waste within 6 weeks. The question here should obviously not be about improving educational standards inside a system that produces these effects, for surely that would mean that we are educating our children to get better at slowly killing themselves. The question here should surely be, how do we educate the next generation to want absolutely nothing to do with this system as fast as possible? With results such as these, it should seem obvious that there is no little thing wrong around here, and any conversation regarding education must also factor in every other aspect of the bio-psycho-social environment, as all play a role in shaping human behaviour, cultural values, and society as a whole. So let's go through these cultural assumptions and underpinnings inherent to our social system and their reflected counterparts in education. The first assumption of the efficacy of our way of life is that infinite growth on a finite planet makes sense, which it obviously doesn't. Nothing can grow forever in a finite space, yet we adults appear to think so. Surely we cannot make the claim that using a system based on a completely unsustainable practice will somehow lead to sustainability and keep a straight face, can we? Any so-called economy that measures its health based on the rate of consumption going up rather than down is not an economy, but an anti-economy. making the apparently positive reports of recent growth in the British economy look like a doctor breaking the news of a tumour growth in his cancer patient with a congratulations card. One of the driving forces behind this lunacy is the equally balmy idea of materialism. The notion that buying things to make impressions that won't last on people we don't know with money we don't have will somehow bring us lasting joy and happiness. This is often touted as an argument against mass social change, for it's just human nature to have infinite wants, so we should just throw in the towel and get those kids in India to pump out a few more handbags and shoes for us all to buy. The only problem with this argument is that it's also completely fallacious. Prior to the First World War, people were actually exceptionally prudent. Naturally, with the ever-increasing productivity of machine technology, industry sought to change this mentality and maintain consumption of their products by embarking on a mass psychological warfare campaign. They did this by equating buying things to be an expression of freedom and appealing to our need for social acceptance and sexual attraction. Many of the same tools had been used to manipulate public opinion in wartime by public relations experts such as Sigmund Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays. So why could the same not be achieved in times of peace? The answer was, it could, and production and consumption shot up as a result, with each human on average now consuming over twice as much as they did before the Second World War. All as a supposed expression of freedom, something that in a truly free society does not need the help of marketing to advertise to help convince you of. Surely you would already know you're free. What this actually means is the freedom to buy what we tell you to buy. The positive consideration regarding this technique, however, is that if such desires can be inculcated through advertising, marketing, and public policy, then the opposite is also true, showing that we are a highly adaptable creature, one hugely influenced by the conditions and culture which surround us. For example, in a recent study, it was found that if just 10% of a given population want to go in a particular direction, then the rest will follow. This is not to advocate a follow-the-leader mentality, but it does show that we can indeed turn things around by actively shunning the vanity-obsessed narcissism of materialism and encourage our kids to do the same. But if we are to do this, then we must lead by example. If we bring up our kids on a diet of advertising and buy them fast food with the word happy on the box, whilst proclaiming that you can't buy happiness, then we are, I'm afraid, missing the point. It is not to belittle how hard it is for parents to resist the pull of an environment designed to cajole us from cradle to grave to consume everything we lay our eyes upon, but we have to start somewhere, and leading by example seems like a pretty good place to start to me. Just as the Bolivian people have done by refusing to eat at McDonald's, which is now entirely shut down in their country, with the Bolivian people choosing food over poison. The current educational model reflects this short-term reward system of materialism perfectly, unfortunately, through the use of punishment and reward systems such as detentions, golden time, stickers, praise and grades, all of which have been shown to do three things: decrease long-term intrinsic interest in a given task, limit risk-taking and thinking outside the box, and only to do the bare minimum of requirements to achieve the grade on offer, whilst continually seeking the approval and external reward of others to maintain interest. Whether intentional or not, this is the perfect conditioning for a consumptive mentality. Short-term fixation on extrinsic rewards, which requires regular reinforcement as well as a good dose of fear and social ostracism for daring to think outside the box. The competitive school model also helps to reinforce comparison with others, where collaboration is actually referred to as cheating. It does not have to be this way, and I know because I have proved it myself. I went to my daughter's school to show the kids the amazing technology on offer to humanity should we choose to use it, and a year on, they still talk to me about what I showed them that day. Whether it's vertical hydroponic food farms that could feed the world sustainably hundreds of times over, evacuated tube transport systems that use just 2% the energy of planes, create next to no pollution, and are capable of speeds of 4,000 miles an hour, or driverless cars, these kids still talk to me animatedly about these subjects regularly. So if kids only learn, retain, and are interested in something when a grade or subsequent punishment is on offer, then why have they managed to display all three of these attributes regarding this information when no punishment, grade, or praise was on the table, so to speak? The second cultural assumption is that jobs will be there in the future. No, they won't. Or at least not very likely the ones we are preparing the children of today for. Due to the exponential increase in technological efficiency and decrease in price of it over time, industry is on pace to replacing jobs with automation in a way never before seen in human history. For example, a recent Oxford University study concluded that 46% of the remaining labour market in America could be automated in the next 10 to 20 years. Labour is the backbone of capitalism, and in turn the entire monetary market system. So preparing our kids for professions we think will always be there is investing them in an uncertain future, to say the least. Whilst it did indeed used to be the case that new technology brought with it new forms of employment, the trend is showing that human beings are now not able to retrain fast enough to keep up with this trend, and as the price in said technology gets cheaper over time, then companies will choose to automate as soon as it is cost effective to do so. So rather than figuring out arbitrary jobs in which we can have those watching those who are watching the machines, why not question if engaging in the forced labour for income game makes sense to continue with at all in the wake of such technological advances? After all, is that not why we invented technology in the first place? To make life easier? Would losing a practice in which 80% of people say they hate be such a bad thing? Inside this system, yes, it would. But just for argument's sake, if we were to adopt a social operating system whereby we use our most up-to-date understandings of science and technology to aid our collective prosperity by providing an access abundance for all the world's people without the need for a price tag, would losing what is essentially a life of paid slavery for one of enrichment, collaboration and adventure be such a bad thing? Oh, come on. Without money, human beings will sit on their backsides like lazy slobs all day. But once again, fortunately, this assumption is completely unfounded. In Dan Pink's book Drive, it is shown that we do indeed work harder in monotonous labour tasks when monetary incentive increases. But when it comes to creative pursuits, something that will be a major factor in any future economy due to increased automation, it actually diminishes the ability to think creatively. This whole issue of laziness is in fact arse about face. For the very fact that we are forced to work actually creates laziness. Think about it. If you do something you loathe all day long, of course you want to slob in front of the idiot box and forget about it all until tomorrow. Besides, Friday is just round the corner and you can go out and get drunk with your mates, spend Saturday hungover before being miserable on Sunday about going back to what really amounts to paid slavery all over again on Monday morning. With the sort of rhetoric you hear from people regarding the feckless layabouts on benefits, Daily Mail, you would think that these people forgot that they were fleeced of $29 trillion in 2008 by the banks. Roughly the same amount that it would have cost in that year to build a worldwide renewable energy infrastructure. Still, as long as we're looking down and not up. This debate surrounding working for a living seems to assume that the only way to make a meaningful contribution to society is by getting a job, paying tax, and sticking a cross in a box every 4 years. By this logic, if you are an arms dealer and pay your taxes, then you are making a meaningful contribution to society. This absurd argument is precisely the sort that commonly dictates the parameters of debate. And by all means you're welcome to shout inside that box as loud as you like. A sentiment well put by Noam Chomsky in the following quote. The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum. Even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people the sense that there's free thinking going on, whilst all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of debate. Many espouse the value of earning a living and having a job, but when most are asked what they would do if they won the lottery, one of the first things they say is that they would give up work. Surely the object of a sane society would be to create unemployment as fast as possible, welcoming automation of laborious labour and limiting the working week as much as possible to allow people the free time to do as they wish with their lives. Social altruism would flourish in such a social system, one that is actually there to enhance human well-being explicitly, instead of having to turn to the patchwork method of charity to do so, which should itself provide a perfect example of a system that is totally incapable of doing what it is supposed to do, that is, to meet the needs of the human population. The third assumption is equal opportunity for all. The gap between rich and poor has increased in Britain and the USA since 1970, and social mobility has slowed, this making it increasingly harder to achieve equality of opportunity. The division of labour and inequality is reflected in the school model. Once again, it works for what we have. An example of this is that now that more than half of the original cabinet here in the UK had their secondary education exclusively at independent schools, while 7 were state educated. The remaining 7 were educated either at grammar schools or at 2 or more schools of different status. In the words of George Carlin, it's a big club and you ain't in it. Equal opportunity, if you're lucky enough, is not what it says on the label. It says equal opportunity, something the monetary market system cannot and will never deliver, as it is structurally impossible to do so. This brings the issue of money creation onto the table, as if the means of life is brought into existence in such a way as to ensure that more of it will increasingly end up in the hands of a few, then how can we ever expect to address the issue of increasing income inequality? Precisely, we can't. And unfortunately, this is exactly how our monetary system works globally. Money is created out of debt with interest applied in a system known as fractional reserve banking, which means that not only do you have to find the principal to pay back to the private banks who created it in the first place by submitting to labour, but you must also pay the interest which never existed to begin with. Couple this in with earning money just for having money in your bank account, effectively taking interest payments of those in debt to service this function, and it is easy to see how the financial inequality we are experiencing will only ever increase in such a circumstance. Money is not simply a tool of neutrality to use as we choose, for it has inbuilt psychological propensities towards a gaming strategy mentality, power consolidation, and inequality, as the more of it you have, the higher up in the food chain you are, immediately pitting you off against your fellow man, seeing him as a competitor rather than a collaborator. It also perpetuates the propensity towards the protection of established interests, even when they no longer serve any meaningful social function. It poisons our personal relationships and perpetuates a class system that divides humanity and produces war, crime, poverty, and collusion. It no longer has to be this way, and we should not tell our kids that it should either. They can change the world, but like any challenge, they need the correct information, valuable guidance, and the ability to decipher whether what they are being told is true or false. A natural law, resource-based economy is not perfect, but that is precisely the point, and why it uses the method of science to arrive at the best decision at the time, looking to update the system when a better idea or new information comes to light, irrespective of vested interests, artificial divisions, ego, profit, politics, or money. Money was indeed once a massively useful tool, but we have simply outgrown its usefulness by reaching a new, but unfortunately withheld, technical reality, in which we could easily provide the necessities of life to every man, woman, and child on the face of this planet, something never before possible until now. It is not a question of abolishing money, Like all other problems we face, we must address the reason for the existence of them in the first place. That is how you solve problems, by rendering them obsolete technically, not by passing laws and voting. That is a patchwork suppression of a problem, and not a solution. A point well made by Buckminster Fuller when he said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Surely we would rather be teaching our kids that knowledge is not something fixed to be regurgitated for a figurative monetary reward in the shape of a grade, only to be forgotten the following week, but rather something we should pursue for the love of discovery itself. Why not teach our children that the truth is no fixed thing, but emergent upon new evidence and a product of passionate dedication to the task in hand, and to celebrate failure and being wrong as a stepping stone on the road to success? Part 3. Shifting educational values. Though our heart may be in the right place, if the conditions in the environment do not support and reinforce these intentions, then we are condemned to fail in reaching our objective. What we think we are doing and what we actually do are two very different things. In the words of futurist, industrial engineer and designer of the Venus Project and resource-based economy Jacques Fresco once said, "Whatever happens is real. Whatever you expect to happen is unreal. It's only your expectations that hurt you, not reality itself." Our system produces what it produces, not what we demand or expect it to produce. So if we do not shift our values accordingly, whilst advocating a new, updated social system based on a completely different set of decision-making criteria, then we are unfortunately doing very little to change our long-term prosperity. In my experience, the greatest attribute that children possess is that they do not think they know everything yet, and still believe absolutely rightly that they can change the world. They bring fresh eyes to old problems, and do not have the same red tape wrapped around their prefrontal cortex, retarding their ability to think clearly, as many adults still do. But somewhere along the way, society tells them that global peace and unity is just a pipe dream for sixth form common rooms and chats down the pub, rather than how the real world actually works, or ever will. These supposed responsible adults delivering this depressing message to children clearly do not appreciate the obvious logic that whether you are docile and obedient to the prevailing status quo or fight for a new one, by the mere virtue of your presence on this planet, you will change something about it, whether you like it or not. What you change is up to you. Either you can support and so in turn speed up the denigration of our social immune system and the life ground on which we all depend, hurting yourself and your nearest and dearest in the process, or advocate a new model that addresses the root cause of these issues by using the best decision-making method we have ever come to know of. The question is really just one of integrity. I have to say that these are the reasons I prefer talking to kids about this stuff. They just see the obvious logic of it. Not because they're naive, but because they have not been indoctrinated into believing that what we adults are doing makes sense. They ask me questions that I have to say I don't know to, because they are still prepared to think outside the box. That rarely happens when I talk to adults about the idea of an NLRBE. They rarely ask questions, being eager to jump to conclusions about what they think it is. We adults won't share our toys, even though we tell kids to do just that. We talk about healthy living and create a system where we pollute our food and water supply and mop it up with pills. So many of us still long for the ever-loving parent figure in the shape of a god or great leader to save us from ourselves, venerating popes, presidents, pop stars and politicians, which only teaches our kids that they must look up or down instead of to themselves for salvation. The best we can say for sure is that this change is not coming from elsewhere, so it is time for the adult world to grow up and tell their kids the truth, and that truth is this. We adults talk a good talk, but we don't walk a good walk, kids. Perhaps you will have a better idea of how to achieve these goals, as we clearly do not have a clue what we're doing. For children to grow up to be healthy and happy, they need to know that the future is in their hands and that they have the freedom to shape the world as they would like it to be. Like all human beings, they have a need for love, compassion, empathy, and autonomy, along with their basic needs of food, shelter, clothing, and alike. But if they do not appreciate the need to build a system that supports and reinforces these attributes inherently, then they are engaging in mere sentimentality and wishful thinking. For education to change, our societal structure must also change. And for our societal structure to change, so must education. If we are serious about the issue of educational reform, then we must know why we are making such reforms. When our kids approach us, as they will, with their fears for an uncertain future from the perspective of where we are today, then I think the following words are a pretty good message to give to them, in helping them to make their future and the future generations to come a healthier, happier one. For a long time now, the world's religious leaders, philosophers, and writers have been proposing notions of how the world can become a more peaceful, happy, and joyful place in which for us all to live. But the ability to technically achieve the abundance required for such a globally collaborative system was never a reality until now. We've achieved so much as a species, and to our knowledge are the greatest evolutionary success story this universe has ever created. Quite simply, we are amazing, and together there is nothing we can't do. We've changed before, and we can do it again, but not without effort. So I'm afraid the first change has to start with you, not someone else. In the final analysis, we are one people, and we share one planet.